"Ma'am, will you buy my bike?" She was 6 years old, standing alone on a cracked sidewalk in 90-degree summer heat, her small hands wrapped around the handlebars of a pink bicycle, and in the white wicker basket zip-tied to the front, propped carefully against the wire so it faced the street where strangers walked past, was a piece of torn cardboard with 2 words written in purple crayon: "For sale." Lieutenant Ava Ramirez had not seen her yet. The only reason she stopped was because her German Shepherd refused to move. Rex had been trained to ignore explosions. He had walked through active gunfire in 3 separate countries. He had smelled an IED buried beneath 6 inches of Afghan sand on a moonless night and sat down calmly beside it while the entire unit held their breath. He did not startle. He did not panic. He did not, in 7 years of operational service, stop without reason. But on this Tuesday afternoon, on this quiet American street, he stopped. No growl, no bark, no pull against his leash. He simply went still, the particular stillness Ava have learned to read the way other people read weather. Every muscle in his big gray and tan body became perfectly calm, perfectly focused, his dark amber eyes locking on to something ahead with the kind of attention that meant he had already decided this mattered before she had even registered what it was. Ava followed his gaze, and that was when she heard the voice. "Ma'am, please, will you buy my bike?" She turned. She saw the girl, and something in her chest moved. Not broke, not yet, but shifted, the way a foundation shifts before anyone above it knows what is about to happen. Lieutenant Ava Ramirez was 34 years old. She was a decorated operator in the United States Navy SEALs, one of the first women to complete the pipeline and one of a small number to serve in active combat operations. She had 3 deployments behind her: Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, and a service record her commanding officer had once described as extraordinary, which, in the language of the military, meant she had done things that most people would spend the rest of their lives trying not to dream about. She had been extracted from a burning vehicle. She had held a tourniquet on a teammate's leg for 40 minutes in the back of a helicopter. She had received a commendation she was not allowed to describe in public. She had knocked on 4 doors she had not wanted to knock on, and said 4 versions of the same sentence she had trained for and never gotten used to saying. She was home on 30 days of leave. Medical. Her commanding officer had used the word mandatory, which meant he had watched her face for a moment too long and seen what she was working to keep invisible. Peace, it turned out, was harder than war. War had structure. War had a mission. War told you every morning exactly what you were supposed to be doing and who you were supposed to be protecting and where the enemy was. Home had none of that. Home was just silence and space and the particular weight of everything she had been carrying, finally having nowhere to go. Rex had been her partner for 5 of her 7 years of service, a German Shepherd trained at Lackland, assigned to her unit at the beginning of her 2nd deployment. He had saved her life twice, once in a doorway in Mosul and once in a ravine outside Aden, in circumstances she still could not fully describe without her hands beginning to shake. He had retired 8 months ago when his hips began to slow him down, and Ava had filed the adoption paperwork the same day the retirement papers were signed. She was not going to leave him in a kennel. She was not going to let him end his life anywhere except beside her. He was slower now, grayer around the muzzle. He tired on longer walks, and his back legs sometimes trembled on stairs, but his instincts had not faded by a single degree. And right now, every one of them was pointed at a 6-year-old girl standing alone in the heat with a cardboard sign. Ava walked toward her. As she got closer, she saw what the distance had hidden: the worn-through left toe of the child's shoe, white rubber separating from canvas, the yellow dress washed so many times it had faded to the color of old light, the tight set of that small jaw, the way her chin was lifted just slightly higher than was natural, the way people lift their chins when they are trying to keep something from falling off their face. Rex walked ahead of her, slow and deliberate. He reached the girl first. He sniffed her small hand once, gently, and the little girl looked down at him without flinching, with the careful steadiness of a child who has already used up the part of herself that startles easily. Then Rex turned his head to the right, and Ava saw the woman.
She was sitting at the far edge of the lawn beneath a maple tree whose shade had shifted with the afternoon sun and now barely covered her. She was young, not yet 30, Ava guessed, but she sat with the collapsed stillness of someone whose body had been running on empty for longer than it should have been asked to. She was wrapped in a thin cotton blanket despite the heat. Her face was the particular pale that has nothing to do with complexion and everything to do with not eating. Her hands, folded in her lap, were shaking in the small, involuntary way that happens when the body has been asked to function without fuel for too many days in a row. She was watching her daughter approach strangers on the sidewalk, and she was not stopping her. Not because she didn't want to, because she couldn't. Because this was what it had come to, and she knew it, and the knowing was written across every line of her face in a language that Ava, who had seen people in extremity before, could read without any translation at all. Rex walked to her, without a command, without any direction from Ava. He simply walked across that lawn to the woman beneath the maple tree, lowered his great gray head, and rested it gently in her lap. The woman looked down at him, her lips pressed together. Her shoulders began to shake, and then, without a single sound, she began to cry, the deep, exhausted, wrung-out crying of someone who has been holding it in for so long that when it finally comes, there is no noise left, only the shaking of a body that has been trying to be strong for longer than strength was available. Rex did not move. He stayed perfectly still with his head in her lap and let her cry. Ava stood at the edge of the lawn for a moment and felt something she had not felt since the last time she stood at a door she didn't want to knock on. She crouched down in front of the little girl so their eyes were level. "What's your name?" "Mira." "That's a beautiful name." She kept her voice even, steady, the same voice she used in the field when someone needed to be calmed rather than alarmed. "Is that your mama?" Mira nodded. "Her name is Clara. She's sick." She said it plainly, without softening it, the way children say hard things before the world teaches them to wrap the truth in something softer before handing it over. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days. I thought if I sold my bike I could buy bread and soup." She paused. "The soup at the store by our house is $1.49. I checked." Ava looked at her. She made herself hold the sentence. She made herself hear it fully. A 6-year-old child who had gone to the store and looked at the price of soup and come home and taken out her bicycle and written "for sale" on a piece of cardboard and carried it to the sidewalk, alone, without telling her mother, because her mother was too sick to stop her, and the refrigerator was empty, and someone had to do something. "You checked?" Ava said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." Mira's grip tightened on the handlebars. The plastic streamers trembled slightly in a breath of hot air. "I really love my bike. It was my birthday present. But Mommy is more important than a bike." And there was the sentence, the one that went through Ava the way only the simplest truths can go through a person, clean and complete, and leaving no room for anything except the full weight of what it meant. Because 3 years ago, on a different lawn, in a different city, on the hardest day of Ava's life to that point, She had knelt in her dress uniform in front of a different little girl, also 6 years old, the daughter of Staff Sergeant Daniel Ortega, her teammate, her friend, the man who kept a photograph of his daughter rubber-banded to the stock of his rifle so that she was the last thing he touched every time he picked it up, and the first thing he touched every time he set it down. Daniel, who had been funny in the particular dark way that only combat soldiers are funny, who could make the whole unit laugh at 3 in the morning in a forward operating base in the middle of a country that wanted them dead, who had a gap between his front teeth and called his daughter Sunshine in every satellite call home, regardless of who was listening. Daniel, who had stepped in front of Ava during an ambush on a road outside Mosul and made a decision in a fraction of a second that she had replayed in her mind every single night since. At the reception after the funeral, Sophia had found Ava standing alone by a window. She had taken Ava's hand without saying anything for a long time. Then she had looked up with the same kind of steadiness Mira had, the same chin, the same eyes that held something too old for a 6-year-old face, and she had asked, "Did my daddy know he was going to do that?" Ava had not been able to answer, and Sophia had nodded slowly, as though she already understood, and said quietly, "I think he chose you." Mira was the same age, same chin, same ancient steadiness in her eyes, and she had just made her own version of a choice, not with her life, but with the only piece of her childhood she had left to give. Ava stood up slowly. She took one breath. She looked at Rex, still beside Clara under the maple tree, his head still in her lap, his amber eyes watching Ava with the quiet patience that had always been his deepest gift, the patience of an animal who had seen enough of the world to know that some moments need to be sat with before anything can be done about them. She looked back at Mira. "I'm not going to buy your bike," Ava said. Mira's face didn't crumble, it just went very still. She nodded once, the practiced nod of a child learning too early what resignation feels like. "But I'm not walking away either," Ava said, "okay? I need you to trust me for just a little while. Can you do that?" Mira looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Rex, at this big, old, gray-muzzled dog who had walked across her lawn without being called and put his head in her mother's lap and not moved since. She looked back at Ava. "Okay," she said. Ava sat down on the lawn beside Clara, and she listened. Clara told her everything, slowly, carefully, in the halting sentences of someone who has not been asked how they are doing in a very long time, and is almost afraid to answer truthfully in case the telling of it makes it more real. She had worked for 4 years as a logistics coordinator for a regional catering company. Good work, steady work, work she was skilled at and valued for, and had built a small, careful life around. 8 weeks ago, the company restructured. An automated HR system had flagged her position as redundant. She had received an email on a Thursday afternoon telling her Friday was her last day. She had filed the hardship extension request the company's own policy guaranteed for long-term employees. The request had gone into a digital queue. No one had reviewed it. No one had seen it. The system had simply held it, unread, while the weeks passed and the savings ran out, and the anemia she managed with medication she could no longer afford began to fold her slowly inward until some mornings she could not stand, with the room tilting sideways. She had too much pride to ask her neighbors, too much shame to let Mira see the full truth. But Mira had seen it anyway, the way children see everything their parents most want to hide, and had gone quietly to the store to check the price of soup and come home and made a plan. When Clara finished, she looked at Ava with exhausted eyes. "She took the bike out this morning before I woke up. I didn't know until I looked through the window." Her voice broke. "She's 6 years old. She shouldn't have to—" She couldn't finish it. Rex lifted his head from her lap.
He looked at her with his amber eyes. Then he placed his large front paw, slowly, gently, with complete deliberateness, on her knee, just rested it there, warm and steady and certain, the way he had always communicated the one thing that no amount of training had put into him, because it was already there when he arrived. I am here. You are not alone. I am not leaving. Clara looked down at that paw, and something in her face that had been clenched for 8 weeks slowly, quietly began to open. Ava drove home that evening with Rex in the back seat and made phone calls for 3 hours. Emergency food delivery arranged by morning. Not a charity box, actual groceries, the kind with fresh bread and vegetables and the specific soup that cost $1.49. She located Clara's hardship request through the state labor board's record system. She found the name of the CEO of the catering company. She drove to his office 2 mornings later, with Rex walking calmly beside her, leash slack. His name was Gerald Marsh, late 50s, the careful bearing of a man who had built something real and knew its weight. He looked up when Ava walked in and saw a woman in civilian clothes who carried herself with the particular economy of movement that comes from years of operating in environments where unnecessary motion gets people killed, and a large German shepherd who looked at him with calm, assessing, completely unhurried eyes, and he understood immediately and correctly that this was not a routine conversation. Ava placed something on his desk, a piece of torn cardboard, purple crayon, for sale. A 6-year-old girl made that sign, she said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of someone who has learned that real authority never needs volume. She carried it to the sidewalk to sell her birthday bicycle so she could buy her mother soup. Her mother worked for your company for 4 years. Her hardship request has been sitting unread in your system for 6 weeks. Gerald Marsh looked at the cardboard sign for a long time. Then he looked at Ava. I've carried soldiers off battlefields, she said. I have knocked on doors in the middle of the night and said things to families that I will carry for the rest of my life. I have never once encountered an enemy as quietly destructive as a process that no one bothered to check. She let that land. Your system wasn't cruel, Mr. Marsh. It was indifferent. And indifference can starve a family just as effectively as cruelty. The difference is that indifference can be corrected. Rex, from beside her, looked at the man across the desk and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing. Gerald Marsh opened his computer. He pulled Clara's file. He read the hardship request, all of it, every word, and then he read the medical note that his HR system had never flagged for human review. He sat with it. Then he looked up and said, I didn't know. I know you didn't, Ava said. That's why I came here instead of a lawyer. Within 72 hours, Clara received a phone call, her position restored in a flexible administrative role, full medical coverage reinstated, retroactive to the date of termination, 6 weeks of back pay issued. Gerald Marsh quietly and without any announcement personally funded an employee hardship review process, a human being assigned to read every request without exception within 48 hours of receipt. No press release, no celebration, just a wrong being corrected by a man who, when someone made him see it clearly, chose to fix it. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when the summer heat had finally broken and the air was the particular clean blue of early September, Ava drove to the park on Clement Street. She saw them from the far end of the path. Clara on a bench, her posture different now, upright, present, her color returning, her eyes clear and forward-looking in the way that eyes look when the body is finally being fed again. and Mira, in the same yellow dress, on the same pink bicycle, riding in wide, wobbling, joyful circles around the path, with the streamers blurring in the wind she was making herself, the white wicker basket bouncing, the cardboard sign long gone, and the basket full instead with 3 small wildflowers she had apparently stopped to pick from the edge of the grass. Rex saw her before Ava did. His tail began moving in slow, certain sweeps, not the quick, anxious wagging of a younger dog, but the deep, full-body movement of an old animal who has learned the difference between happiness and relief and is feeling both at once. He made a low sound in his chest, quiet and warm, and his old legs moved faster than they had in months. Mira looked up and saw him coming. She dropped her bike in the grass without hesitation, just let it fall, didn't look back at it, and ran toward him with her arms already open. And Rex ran toward her, this big, gray-muzzled, decorated veteran of 3 wars, running across a park in September toward a 6-year-old girl in a faded yellow dress. And they met in the middle of the path, and Mira threw both arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur and held on. Rex stood perfectly still. He closed his eyes. He let himself be held. Ava stopped walking. She stood on the path and watched a German shepherd who had survived things most humans will never see, allowing a child to hold him with everything she had. And she pressed her lips together hard and breathed carefully through her nose and told herself she was fine. Then Mira looked up and saw her. She released Rex and ran to Ava and wrapped both arms around her waist and pressed her face hard against Ava's side and held on with the full strength of a 6-year-old who has learned in a very short time what it feels like when someone refuses to walk away. And she said, muffled against Ava's shirt, certain and clear and completely without performance, "Thank you for bringing my mommy back." The words moved through Ava like light moves through water, slow and complete and reaching everywhere at once. Because she had heard those words before, 3 years ago, at a reception after a funeral, from a girl named Sophia, standing by a window, holding her hand. "Thank you for bringing my daddy home." Different words, same age, same arms, same voice of a child who had lost something enormous and was trying to find the language to thank the person who had tried to catch it. Ava dropped to her knees on the grass. She put her arms around Mira and held on. This child who had stood on a sidewalk with a cardboard sign and a courage she hadn't even known she had. This child who had chosen her mother over her childhood and somehow, against everything, gotten both back. And Rex walked forward and pressed his warm old body against both of them, and he placed his paw, gently, firmly, with the absolute authority of an animal who has seen enough of the world to know when something sacred is happening, on Ava's knee. Ava felt it land. And Lieutenant Ava Ramirez, decorated, unbreakable, exceptional under pressure, cried. Not for Daniel, though Daniel was there too, the way he was always there. Not for loss, not for the weight she had been carrying since Mosul. She cried for this, for a pink bicycle lying in the September grass, for a little girl who had gotten her mother back, for an old German shepherd pressing his gray muzzle gently against her face and breathing warmth into the places where the cold had lived for a long time. She cried for something she had stopped believing she would feel again. She cried because something had been returned. Later, sitting on a bench beside Clara while Camira rode her circles and Rex trotted alongside her, slower but proud, his tail steady and his head up, Ava thought about what Daniel had once said to her on a night watch in Kandahar, when they were too tired to sleep and talking quietly about why they had chosen this life. He had thought about it for a while and then said simply, "Because somebody has to be the one who doesn't walk away." She understood it differently now. She understood that the mission he was describing wasn't only the one with coordinates and an extraction plan. It was also the one you find on a Tuesday afternoon on a cracked sidewalk in a quiet American town, when a dog who has seen everything stops cold and turns his head toward a small voice trembling in the summer heat.
Strength is not the absence of pain. It never was. Strength is walking toward the voice anyway, when everything in you is already full, when you are already carrying more than anyone can see, when peace has not followed you home and you are not sure it ever will. Strength is stopping. Strength is sitting down on a stranger's lawn and listening. Strength is placing a piece of torn cardboard on a desk and speaking quietly to a man who simply hadn't been made to see yet. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the mission that finds you on a sidewalk is the one that was always meant for you. The one that doesn't have a medal at the end. The one that heals something in the doing of it that nothing else could have reached. Sometimes, saving one family is what finally, after everything, brings a warrior all the way home. If this story reached you, if it found something in your chest and held it, drop one word in the comments right now. Just one word: valor. That's all. Let's see how many hearts this story touched today. And if you haven't yet, this is what we do here. We tell the stories that deserve to be told. The ones that don't make headlines. The ones where the bravest act isn't the one that happens on a battlefield. It's the one that happens on a sidewalk, in a park, in a corporate office where someone finally looks at a piece of torn cardboard and understands what it cost. The little girl never sold her bike. She offered it to a world that had stopped paying attention, and a warrior and her dog refused to be part of that world anymore. They stopped. They stayed. They brought her mother back. And in doing so, without planning it, without knowing it, without any mission brief or extraction plan or commendation to follow, they found their way home too. State of valor, because the bravest people in America don't always carry rifles. Sometimes they carry cardboard signs, and sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply